Welcome to kathysright.com, conservative for the world today. Have you noticed, since Joe Biden has been in office, our situation in our country has gotten progressively worse? The pandemic was bad enough. The left uses every crisis for power grabs. They are shameless about it. Joe Biden has opened our southern borders with his recorded on TV invitation to come. He now says, "Don't come now." These serious problems are numerous, and we will be talking more about that at a later date. In the 80s, back when more people understood how this world actually worked, we used to say, "It's the economy, stupid." We were talking to the bleeding heart liberals at the time, whose remedy for all the ills of the country and that of the world was to tax and spend, taking money from the people contributing to the country and giving it away to anybody and everybody so that they would be liked by them. Basically bullies, stealing lunch money from hardworking nerds. Today the middle class is that hardworking nerd, and the bullies are in power at the moment. They're Democrats. They never change. They haven't changed since the inception of the Democrat Party. I'll venture to say they still believe in slavery. They are the party of the Ku Klux Klan. They are the party that voted against the civil rights, who now claim to champion the cause of black Americans. They are still up to the same old tricks. They have simply removed their hoods and pretend to be the friend of the minorities in America. Sadly, many minorities believe them. I, however, am not so gullible. Today, I speak with an economic expert. He is from Zambia, Africa. His name is Munyumba Mutwale, and he is brilliant. He's an economist, and he's very young. He's an international economic expert. I heard of him from watching a show hosted by my friend, Felicity Joy. I love when I get to speak with someone with way more knowledge than I have on a subject so important. Today, on kathysright.com, it's about the economy, but we're not stupid. But we do have enough common sense to listen to someone well-versed on a subject, a very important subject. It's the economy. So this man makes me feel, I feel better educated for having spoken with him. And that's a good place to be. I just wanted to share his insight with the rest of America, because I think you'll find it fascinating. So welcome, Munyumba Mutwale. We began our conversation discussing voter ID laws and the absurdity that, for some reason, the liberal left thinks it's racist to require a voter ID. I spoke with Munyumba about this subject, and he tells us, from his perspective, how they answered this in their country.
So I actually thought I would actually make this a bit visual, because I thought, because most people, when I say we use two IDs to vote,
Yes,
I thought I'd actually show them to you.
That's interesting.
So this is my national identity card.
Uh-huh.
So this is what I need to open bank accounts, anything. So this is the front part of it. And that's just my face and my ID number.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the back, it's got like the information, like what my full name is. Then it's got where I was born. It's got the name of my village, where I originate from. It's got my what my name of my chief is, what district at the beginning. And then when I get that card, then I have to get this card. So this is just my regular ID card.
Yes.
Then I have to get this card, which is my voter registration card,
Oh,
which is now, this is what I need to vote with as well. And it's got all my information, such as what my name is, what my address is, and what polling station I have to vote at. So all that is there, what polling station, where I go and vote. And if I don't, I needed this to get this, and then I need both of these. On election day, I have to present this, then I have to present this, then I can go in and vote.
wow.
7 million of us did that. And we only had 45 days this year to all get our voters cards. And about 7 million out of 9 million of us did it this year. in
Wow.
45 days.
So that completely busts the theory of Americans who say Black people can't get an ID. That's
So
crazy.
the question is how? How is that possible if and there are people in much worse, like I can say, look, I'm privileged, but there are people who are literally in such dire situations
Mhm.
but still manage to get both of these identity cards for voting. So the question will always be, how is it tough to get this? If I can get this it takes me 3 hours in the morning to register, and then I have to come and collect it the very next day. And then this took me a whole morning to get. And we were managing to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So the question would be, if anyone, and this is why whenever I say two IDs, people sometimes say, what do you mean? So this is why I wanted to, for the first time, show you that we actually use two identity cards to vote. And we've been doing that for all the time we've been voting.
I don't know a single Black person who doesn't have an ID. This is ridiculous. It's ridiculous for anybody to think that that is a barrier to voting. For instance, to ask for no ID opens the door for all sorts of abuse, because then
Exactly.
You could go to 2 or 3 polls in a day. You could do all of those things and cheat. And that's the only reason that person wouldn't want us to have ID.
If you ask our people whether we should have ID, we will tell you no. We do not want a situation where there's no ID.
Right.
Because I think the other thing is that we also know elections can get stolen. Not to say that it happens all the time, but we've seen it here where our leaders have a lot more power than people think. They're able to do a lot of things with elections where, you see, the thing that you guys have that helps you is your elections are run state by state. So each state has its own independent authority that counts, votes, tallies. There's a whole electoral college system. It's so independent. Our elections are effectively run by the judiciary, who are governed by the president. So imagine the guy running the election has authority over the election.
Oh, that's kind of scary.
You see, so we've seen the dark side of elections. We've seen these things go south. We've seen situations where people question ballots. We've seen where the validity of elections just vanishes. We've seen a situation, I think it was in Zimbabwe a couple of years ago, and Zimbabwe is our next door neighbor, where they found 1 million dead people on the voter registration. And then on the other side of the fact that they also ended up finding ballots already pre-stuffed. Like they got to vote and found pre-marked ballots already in there. Okay, so these are the things we've actually visualized, and we've seen situations where people are not even allowed to campaign because they're told, no, it's a threat, it's not good for society, or things like, oh, it's unsafe. You see, we have nations where, and this is what I warn people about, don't go this route where you give your governments too much power, because eventually what the government will do is the president will have direct control of the police. And that's when you know that you're in a nightmare situation, because that's our country. Our presidents have direct control of the police. The president can tell the police what to do. So what stops that president from saying, go and arrest my opposition, or go and do? That's why opposition members get arrested so easily in Africa, because the presidents have absolute control of police. They have got control of the military. They have control of the voting system, and we have national media. So we have national media, which is controlled by the authority as well. And then finally, you've got the censorship bureaus, effectively, which are controlled by the president. The president can say, I don't want the opposition to speak. I don't want that to happen. I don't want them to go on the national TV station. That's the power that the ones who are trying to pull towards socialism, they're not trying to help society. They're trying to concentrate power in the top office so that they can control it. But that's what you have to fight. A concentrated power base means you can't stop them from doing anything, and they can pass laws. I mean, I think last week, our president signed 20 laws last week. We're even trying to figure out, okay, what did he sign? What was it?
Executive orders and to this day, I do not believe that Joe Biden ran the most successful presidential campaign ever. Came out of that hole 3 times, about 3 times if we were lucky. And from that hole, He came out, babbled a few things, ran right back in, and somehow that was the best campaign. More voters, they're saying, than ever in history. Come on.
Well, I mean, look, statistically, you have to look at one thing did play in their favor. And you can question, obviously, I think, because even us, I asked people here, I said, okay, fine. I know a lot of you don't want to question the election. I asked people, okay, what about here? Mm-hmm. Would you be comfortable with our president just mailed ballots to everyone's house? And everyone just said, oh no. So I said, why do you think it's okay there? But what if our president said, okay, the coronavirus is happening. I think everyone should vote from home. So I'm going to just mail ballots to people's houses. And I'm going to send the post office, who I have total control over, to go and collect the ballots for me. You know that people wouldn't trust that. Already, people wouldn't trust it. And people admittedly said, yeah, they wouldn't trust it. Their argument was trying to be, no, but America's different. There are different systems. I said, corruption is corruption.
Corruption is until within the last 10 years, I didn't know how corrupt our government was. I mean, I was one of the main people pointing the finger at all these other countries. Look how corrupt they are. Look how corrupt the Ukraine country is. Look how corrupt. And then I saw it here, and I saw how they were finagling everything, setting things up so that they could cheat. You can't tell, no one can tell me that if they set things up so that they could cheat more easily, like harvesting votes, that they're not going to take advantage of that. They're going to do it.
The thing is, look, like I said, unfortunately, there's a double argument to this. And just for being fair on this is one, there is a legitimate reason why more voters did come out. And it's also because of the youth vote. Most of the growth in vote numbers came from young people in America. Some of those swing states are a bit sketchy, but most of the number of votes that came up more were from young voters. You have to understand, young people now are lazy. They used to do Uber Eats. They're used to watching things on Netflix. They don't go to the movies. So they don't leave their house much. So something that could actually come to them, and they learned this lesson. I'll tell you where they learned it from. It was the primaries. Mm-hmm. Why did Bernie Sanders, who had so much enthusiasm online, get knocked out on the election? Because young voters didn't pitch up to vote during the primaries. Mm-hmm. So I think they read this situation very carefully and jumped on the first opportunity they could to mass mail ballots. It was to capture the young vote as well. So that's the thing. However, you can't unfortunately validate everything because these were handled ballots. Unfortunately, and the moment the chain of custody starts to get a little bit creepy, then any question comes up. I think it is also incumbent on everyone to make sure that each citizen feels like the election was correct. Yes. I did this in Zambia too. I voted in 2015, 2016. The candidate I want didn't win. But what I said was, I said, I will accept the results simply because I want to try and respect my fellow citizens who voted. That's the only reason I did it. I questioned certain things, but I was worried that an election is more about, for me, it's more about respecting my fellow citizens on the other side. Unfortunately, you guys are really, really, ripped to the seams, like divided horrendously. Yes. So in as much as you want to extend that courtesy, you're not sure if you'll get it back. That's the problem. We have it a little bit better because we're not too aligned with each party. We're divided, but it's one of those things where people switch parties. Yes. Like in our country, people switch parties. Like once you're out of office, people just leave your party and that's it. They go to the next one. So they're not really tied to the parties. There in America, it's a bit different. Like someone's a Democrat, they're a Democrat. Like they stay a Democrat. Like someone's a Republican, they stay a Republican.
They stay Democrat. It's almost a tribalism thing because really they stay Democrats whether they believe in the Democrat platform or not. Many people in my family are that way, and they're very conservative people, but
exactly.
But they vote Democrat. I mean, I'll even ask, my mom. I go, Mom, what do you think about illegal immigration? She goes, well, it shouldn't happen. They take jobs away from people who are here legally. Never mind that it was an illegal who murdered my brother. those kind of things affect you. And they ended up in jail. So my mother said, so we're still paying for them to eat in air conditioned buildings. And it was very hurtful. But no, the thing about that is he shouldn't have been here because he was here illegally. And we don't even know if he was deported when he got out of jail. And so,
No,
but
the reason why I understand the illegal immigration debate is
mhm.
because it's not that far from what happened in South Africa with Zimbabwe.
Um,
They had there's a porous border between South Africa and Zimbabwe. When Zimbabwe collapsed, I think everyone knows about the big collapse of Zimbabwe when their economy went down, and they even had a 10 trillion note at one point because of hyperinflation.
mhm.
There's people of Zimbabwe started running across. Now, between Zimbabwe and South Africa is a national park where they're like wild animals, like full-fledged wild animals, like lions and crocodiles and stuff. So the Zimbabwean people were basically escaping through some of those terrains just to get into South Africa. And they were getting thousands of people coming across their border every single day. Literally, just thousands of Zimbabweans were coming across the border. They had a point where I think millions had eventually migrated there for cheap labor. Now, what you started to see in South Africa was physical xenophobia. I'm not talking about you guys talking about building a wall. I'm talking about full-fledged fist beating people to death, anger, and burning them. Okay, they were burning. These are black people who were burning black people. Okay, killing them because they. So I was asking my friends in South Africa. I said, "What has gotten us to this point? We're fellow black people. And when you guys needed a country to run to, you came to Zimbabwe and South Africa." So he sat me down and he explained it to me. He said, when we go to work in the farming districts,
Right.
some of the local South Africans would stand on the side of the road waiting for work that day. And the farmers would come and pick up workers at the beginning of every day, offer them a wage, and that's it. That's the kind of agreement they had. Whoever was willing to work, come and get some work, and then you can come and work in the farm today. I'll pay you at the end of the day. You can go, you can weed, you can do all sorts of things. Now, what you find is about two Zimbabweans would be standing on the opposite side of the road, and they would now do the same thing, but they would take 10 jobs away. So they would do more work for less pay. So the farmers were now picking the Zimbabweans. Now you had young black South African men not going home without food, going home without money, going home income insecure, poor, struggling, and angry. And their wages couldn't go up because every time new Zimbabweans kept on coming in, their wages were getting diluted and diluted and diluted. It was a stone throw away until they started walking the streets and started beating people to death because they got tired of their president constantly allowing a border, and they've been talking about this. Now, here's a dirty little secret about walls. The other country that's linked to Zimbabwe is Botswana, the country I grew up in. They had a wall. They built a wall. Not they were building a wall. They built a wall and electrified it. That's how much they were trying to keep people out. No one knows this. It got to a point where it worked, and they were deporting people violently. I remember when I was young, military forces used to come to houses with guns and pick people up and say, that one's not from here, yank him out and throw him in a truck and then deport him. So they were deporting Zimbabweans physically and brutally. Not this gentle deportation you guys are talking about. I'm talking about rough deportation. Okay, where if your housekeeper, they would just knock on your door and say, bring your housekeeper or bring your gardener. Okay, what nationality are them? Random spot checks, where they were checking nationalities of workers at your house to make sure these were not illegal immigrants. Nobody knows this as well. Kenya had the same problem with Somalians, and they were trying to combat the rise of Somali terrorism that was coming into Kenya. So Kenya is building a wall. In as much as people think walls are racist, there are 3 walls in Africa between countries, between black countries. It's not racist. This is about keeping undesirable impacts of unfettered immigration out of your system, because you still have citizens you need to take care of.
Yes.
Before you start pour into your country, you've got to make sure your citizens are taken care of first. And that's where the destabilization so you have to look at the wage effect. You have to look at the potential crime effect. These are desperate situations where people come in desperately. In Zambia, we have Rwandese refugees, and we live in peace with them because they come through a structure. And most of the Rwandese refugees come here to set up a business. They don't compete with us for labor. They actually set up businesses in small neighborhoods. They set up stores and grocers, and they're very good at neighborhood groceries. So we've managed to live in peace with them because of that. We had one incident, I think, with them, but generally we've actually managed to live in very good peace with our Rwandese brothers because they come in through a structured format. So when people come in structured, it's an easier way and an easier path to deal with. But when people just are pouring through borders, that's where you get a very dangerous effect. So I've seen two countries react to one with brutal violence and the other one with building a wall. And believe you me, the last thing you want is unemployed young people seeing people pouring into their country become very anxious and angry, especially unemployed young men, because it's usually their hard labor work, because usually illegal immigrants will come and take outside labor work. Yes. And that's usually young men who will take that work. So that's why it always leads to violence. You have to be very careful with that. It's any country this happens in. And there are walls all over the world. People don't get tricked into believing that wall is some special wall. There are walls all over the world where people got tired of dealing with illegal immigration.
Yes. Well, it's better to control the situation because you don't know who you're getting. And right now, the cartels are in charge of the border for the most part. And I've been doing some research about human trafficking, and it's hard to research because it's so painful to hear about what's happening to these children, and even worse, the cartels, they're demanding money from these families, to move these children, sometimes $1,000 or more. And you think, if they're coming from these very impoverished countries, where are they getting the $1,000? Well, I found out some of them, they work it off by prostitution. They sell themselves. And so then their child gets put God knows where. And sometimes those children are literally auctioned off on the internet as slaves. This is happening in the United States of America and worldwide. Human trafficking has now surpassed the drug trade as far as the amount of money that's in that industry. And that is what's so terrifying, because what's happening to these children, I could almost not sit through some of the documentaries that I watched. But yeah, their parents have to pay off their debt, and it's to get they think they're sending their kids off to get adopted or some family member, when in reality, their children are being sold. And not only that, then they are told that in order for their children to be safe, they have to prostitute themselves. Sometimes the mothers are shipped into other countries and flown there from all over. They're all over the world, and it's a disgusting market. And slavery is alive and well in the United States of America, and nobody wants to admit it. And that's why it's flourishing.
So this is why I said that people need to be careful about being roped into political narratives. This is why media fear mongering is very important when you're seeing the way tactics are done. It's so that you don't see the facts. It's so that you don't sit down and say what's going on at the border. Because I even think I saw for the first time, what's his name, Charlemagne the God, actually stood up and say, guys, okay, what's happening at the border is a bit scary. Okay, we can't just have that many people. And even some people are starting to say, okay, what's happening there is not normal. That's way too many people coming in. And you have to understand that the moment you set out a satellite, and this is what happened in Zimbabwe, I think the number, if I'm correct, was about 4,000 Zimbabweans crossing the border between South Africa and Zimbabwe every day. And that was literally, and those were the 4,000 that were making it. Okay, now remember, these aren't even big countries. Zimbabwe is 12 million people. South Africa is 50 million people. So literally, you almost had about a third of Zimbabwe that just shipped itself into South Africa at that point. And what was happening to those people was also tough work. Someone would hire them to do construction, knowing that they were illegal immigrants. And then after they finished doing the work, they would call the immigration office and have them deported so that they could avoid paying them. So this is the stuff we're seeing. They were taking over the construction work, but then they weren't being paid at the end. They were just literally being deported. Somebody would drop a tip, like the person who's actually hired them would say, I think I know that they're illegal immigrants here. and then all of a sudden there'd be a sting operation from nowhere, and then he would avoid paying for people who have had to work there for 90 days doing construction work, and then he gets construction for free. So he starved the locals of jobs, and then he's paid nothing for labor, literally, by just getting them arrested at the end of the day. So this is the kind of situations you can get illegal immigrants into when they come in without structure. Have them come in through things like education, have them come in through actual, maybe entrepreneurship programs. Those are the best ways. You can get a lot more of them in. You'll get some refugees, yes, who need to be relocated, but there's structured refugee programs that can be done. Like I gave you the example of the Rwandese refugees who are brought in with structure, and they're even given a stipend by even the United Nations says, here's some money for you to help start a business so that you're not fighting for labor with the locals. They actually do that specifically. So when they structure to people coming into a country, it kind of puts everyone at ease, and you can kind of filter who's coming in and how they're coming in. But when people just rush a border, it's literally dangerous because you're going to create civil unrest within the country. And for the first time between Zambians and South Africans, we finally saw Zambians getting beaten in the mix because the South Africans were so aggravated with the Zimbabwean influx and I think it was Nigerians at one point, that they just started hitting anybody who wasn't South African. It got to that point where if you're not South African, and this is a story that was told, that they would just come onto the streets and ask you what's elbow in Zulu. And if you didn't say it properly, you were in line for a beating. As in, this was just a group of men could just come up to you and ask questions like that. So these were the warnings we were being given. I was a student at that time. We were told, do not leave some areas because it's dangerous at the moment. Now, it wasn't happening everywhere, but there were some hot zones where it was getting dangerous.
I had a gardener when I lived in California, and he was studying for his construction license. And so he was legal and everything, but he told me about what's going on amongst the workers. And he was telling me, this is years ago. I mean, I've been back home in Texas since 2013. But before that, he told me that the day workers, the ones that people pick up on the sides of the road, that they all demanded that they have to accept no less than $10 an hour. Because if anybody accepted less than $10 an hour, they were undercutting everybody else, even though they were all illegal. So if they found out that somebody took a job for less than $10 an hour, the men would beat them up. That was their union, so to speak. They would beat them up themselves because they accepted less money and undercut everybody else. And he said, that's the norm. They have to take $10 or more or else they get beat up.
And you see, even the irony of the whole illegal immigration thing is that Donald Trump, even as a president, was taking the stance of the Democrat Party in 1992, in fact, 1990 all the way up to 95. The Democrat Party was against illegal immigration. They were all against it because they were the party of the working class. Then what happened is they became the party of the rich at one point. And then they've switched, because what has happened is that everyone thought the Republican Party was the party of the rich. This has happened, by the way, in the last 4 years.
Yes.
Since 2015, Donald Trump came in as the working class president because it's the same Ronald Reagan mentality of the working class president. So he took the hearts of the working class, and therefore the Democrats are the more rich. Now, what confuses me, I think, when I watched this election, the last time, and I think watching it from the outside confused me, is did nobody notice that the Democrats won by becoming a whiter party? Like they lost black and brown votes and they won more white votes. So they actually expanded their white base, but yet they're not the racist ones. And Donald Trump, who lost white voters and gained voters of color, is the racist one. And this is the problem I have with media manipulation. You have a situation where somebody actually had lost. He sacrificed white voters and got more black voters. I think like some numbers I picked up were the male black vote moved up to 20% for him, and then the women's vote was the one that the black women moved from, I think, about 400,000 to about 1.2 million black women moved into voted for Donald Trump.
Right.
So he actually had an exponential growth number in that, yes, he's not getting the majority. But the thing is that growth rates are being eaten from the Democrat Party.
In
Only
spite of the lies told by the media, in spite of it, that because we see right through it, we see right through what they're doing, and it's absurd. And I'm watching CNN, which is not my favorite channel, but CNN, and there's like four. While I was sitting there watching, and they were opining about racism in this country. Four of the five people sitting there, all millionaires, all talking about how put upon they are for being black. I mean, it's such a struggle. Yeah, when somebody picks you up in a limousine, drives you to work, and then your hair is professionally done, and then you get on camera and you go, oh, it's so hard being black. I'm like, really? I don't buy it. And that's another thing about the systemic racism thing, because we are actually the system. When I've gone to help people in court before. I'm not a lawyer, but I've helped by speaking. And I tell you, every time I've gone, my first thing I notice is, oh, the judge is a woman. Oh, this judge is Chinese. Oh, this judge is black. Oh, I saw maybe 1/5 of the people in the courtroom were white or looked like they were white. And so I'm thinking, and then when you go to college, if the college system is is completely controlled by liberals. So if they're saying the system that racism is systemic, and we are the system, we are. I mean, we did elect a black president twice. I didn't vote for him, but somebody did. And how can it be so systemic when we are well represented in the media? Black women are outpacing black men as far as education, receiving degrees. It's not, and then they'll say, well, black people are millionaires at 1/10 the rate of white people. Well, I don't know much about math. Maybe you could help me with that. But aren't we about 13% of the population?
It's true. And here's another number to help you. There is no country with more black millionaires than the United States of America.
That's
no
true.
country in the world has more black millionaires, even by percentage, than the United States of America.
This is the best place in the world to be black, I think.
In fact, let me give you the full rundown. I actually wrote an article once called If Black America Was an African Country. And I gave it to you this way, that they would be the #1 GDP with $1.5 trillion. Second would be Egypt. They would be the highest GDP per capita. They would be the most educated. As I said, they're the highest completion of high school, the most college graduates. No other group has 25% college graduates like African Americans do. They would have the most millionaires. They would have the most business owners by any stretch. They would have the second highest life expectancy, only second to the Seychelles, only by a year, actually. They would have the second lowest poverty rate, second to Mauritius, only by 1%. So there's no other group of black people with a lower poverty rate around the world. If I'm correct, they would have the highest household wealth per capita. There would be the most employed population. There would be the utopia of all African countries. Like there's not a single African country that can come close. Access to healthcare, 80% of African Americans have access to healthcare. You're talking about single digits, low 20% in my country and other countries as well. So the benefits that they've managed to accrue, and it's not because white people just handed it to them. It's because between 1865 and 1960, black people worked their butts off when they got their freedom. And they became landowners, they became business owners, they thrived. The part of American history nobody talks about 1870 to 1960. You go through any of these, maybe in the older times they used to talk about them, but right now, the part of American history, black American history, that keeps getting wiped out further and further is between Martin Luther King and slavery ending. It's like there's a gap that nobody studies. It's like nobody studies that, because in there was the time you saw do for self, build our own cities, build our own enterprises, build schools. Booker T. Washington died the owner of a school, born a slave, died the owner of a school. What a transformation. And an actual man born into slavery, died the owner of a university. So that's what I mean when I say that's what
Father
people
moved
miss out.
to Texas because there was no work in Louisiana at the time. He moved to Texas. He drove trucks. He drove taxi cabs. He mopped the floors at the bowling alley. He would have 4 jobs. By the time he died, he was the president of a multi-million-dollar credit union bank. Now, that is going from nothing to something. So to me, I found that I've always been surrounded by Black achievers. And so I kind of felt as though everybody was like that. But it turns out everybody wasn't like that, I guess. Oh, I think you're frozen. I'm going to continue to record because I can definitely edit out the frozen part. Oh, there you go. Oh, come back. There you are.
Yeah, I think I'm back. Yeah.
Yeah, but my father did that, and whenever he achieved something, he kind of started resenting people saying, "Oh, well, he's the first Black to do this, and then he was the first Black to do that." He goes, "No, I accomplished something because I worked hard for it. It had nothing to do with the color of my skin. I accomplished this in spite of what the world told me I could achieve." And that is exactly the attitude that I have, that he gave to us, and I gave to my children. You can do anything you want to do in this world. You put your mind to it, and don't answer to people who think less of you or don't expect much from you, because they don't know who you are. They don't know what good stock you come from, because they come from me, and I'm good stock. I mean, I got my parents. My parents, I have to say, they were awesome. My mom's very sick right now, so I'm kind of sad about that. But yeah, I was very blessed with the parents. And then I look at my whole neighborhood. I grew up in a neighborhood called Pleasantville in Houston. And Pleasantville, most of the parents got those houses. They were brand new at the time with a GI Bill for $1 down payment. My father had been a GI, and he got it for the down payment. Everybody, when they first moved there, they were working either at a factory or working cleaning houses or something like that, but they worked and worked and worked. By the time I was a teenager, most of the people on my street had become doctors, lawyers, judges, city councilmen, funeral home directors. They all did that. So I never bought into this, we can't do this. Why would I?
What you're, as I say, you have to be, the whole race debate, and that's why I keep saying everyone has to be very careful. It is not really, it's not a natural thing in society for there to be such animosity between races. People generally want to live together. They generally want to be in harmony. It's just that there are people at the top who benefit from the chaos in the masses. And the reason is that you're not going to watch what's happening. And you have to be very, very wary of your country and the history that usually happens right around the time there's usually a culture war. If you go back to about 1920, the Roaring Twenties was a time there was lots of cultural animosity. The flappers were coming about. There was this change, and there was a sexual revolution. There were race revolutions that were happening all sorts of places. And you know, the thing that really kicked it off was in the background, there was a lot of looting happening in your financial system. So always go back to this and always realize, so then you had 1929 happened, all of a sudden the Great Depression kicks in. And then this big depression happens, and everyone just wakes up to the fact that their economy was rotting the whole time. While they were busy having cultural fights, their economy was rotting. Go back to 1960, the hippie revolution. Hippie revolution was happening all over the place. Everyone was fighting, all these marches and all sorts. 1970 happens, a big recession hits America again. You will notice a pattern. And every time you see a cultural revolution for about 10 years, there's a recession that follows it. Because usually that cultural revolution acts as a mask that nobody can see what's happening behind it. There's printing of money. There's all sorts of things happening in the background, remaneuvering of finances, and all of a sudden there's stock trading and greed happening in Wall Street, all these things. But because you're too focused on the cultural revolution, you're not paying attention to how rich the rich are getting in the background. And then all of a sudden, when their greed exceeds, you all feel it in a recession. So the worry that you need to be careful of right now is that the American rich are experiencing some high levels of greed while you're all distracted in the cultural war. Because I can tell you this, when this all breaks down and everything finally exposes itself and the financial side of it buckets out and you realize that you're holding on to one of the worst recessions that's actually coming from. There are numbers that will scare you, like the number of zombie companies in America. A zombie company is a company that cannot pay its interest rates on its loan. 1/5 of American companies right now are zombie companies. It used to only be 2%, but 1/5 of large corporations are zombie companies. They shouldn't even be existing, but they're being kept alive by the Federal Reserve printing money. You're not noticing this because you're all fighting in the middle of the street. And you know what you're going to notice? The liberals and the conservatives notice that you are not each other's enemies. There's somebody behind trying to push all of this who's your real enemy. And one day you're going to realize that the two of you are going to be fighting side by side next to each other, trying to fight an even greater enemy, who is wealth and class. This whole thing. And go back to a book called The Sociology of the South, by George Fitzhugh, who explains this concept that he said slavery is not meant only for the rich. It's meant even for only for the blacks. It's meant for the poor whites as well. They want to enslave everyone into a bad system. And he actually explained that concept. And he said the perfect form of slavery, and he said this in 1850, is socialism. He actually said those words. He said the perfect form of slavery is socialism. It is a way for us to put all under the system of control of class. And the aim is to start with the black people and slowly spill it over into mass society. And look at it this way. Welfare started putting black people in socialism, and slowly they've indoctrinated young white Americans into socialism as well. And they're getting them as they're young, because what the left and liberals, because it's no longer liberals anymore. This is the left. This is not liberals. Liberals have a bit more sane minds than this. And what the left and basically are doing is they understand that if they can teach a generation their ideology, they can inject it into society forever. And that is where the conservatives are losing the fight. Yes. Never, ever let go of the education system in your country. Never. It is the most dangerous thing to give away. Because once the church, because back in the 1800s and early 1900s, most schools were church-based schools. So the education was coming from the church, and therefore conservative values were going to be instilled in the children. What happened in 1965 is the Public School Act basically came in, that Education Act that came in 1965, where the public sector could now take over the education system and infused their ideology into it. And before you know it, socialism is popular.
Oh, yes. My children were fine before public school. They were fine. They were good citizens, productive. I saw it happening slowly. I saw it happening when I was in college. I remember having to fight for a grade before because I disagreed with my teacher. And she was obviously, I was taking a class called Women's Literature. And I wanted to read books written by women. I thought that was what the class would be about. That's what the description looked as though it were. As it turns out, it wasn't about that at all. It was a class all about lesbianism, pretty much. And I wasn't a lesbian. And so, but you'd go in there and the way that she would describe the books we were reading, and by the way, most everybody at the end of the books that were chosen for this class killed themselves at the end of the, because they're just so put upon because they're lesbians, and then they end up, anyways, it was just shameful. Anyways, so I had to write a paper, one of my final papers, and I was supposed to compare, I think it was either Yeats or, might be Yeats or Keats. Anyways, it was a male poet and a female poet. And I said that the reason that he saw the same issue, the poems are about the same thing, was because he was a man and men think differently. And she gave me a D. I'd never made a D in my life, especially in an English class. And I'm thinking, okay, but there's no red marks on here. You know, she can't say that I didn't do it correctly. I validated everything that I said. I had a bibliography even. I did everything. I took it to another professor. He was a man. And I said, what do you think this paper? He goes, well, at worst, Kathy, would be an A-, at worst. So he said, I suggest you go and talk to your teacher and ask her to tell you why she gave you the D. and tell her also that you were going to show a copy of it to your dean. And so I went to her and I said, please explain to me, because there's no red marks. You didn't tell me why you gave me such a poor grade. And what she said to me was kind of puzzling, something like, well, Kathy, it wasn't because he was a man, it's because he wasn't a woman. I'm like, so basically in her mind, either you're a woman or you're not a woman, but there's actually like no such thing as a man. You understand? It's weird. Anyways, so rather than argue with me, she put a B plus on my thing and in her pad, and I left. But think of all the students who maybe didn't have the wherewithal to go and challenge something like that, pushing that agenda. It was very, very, I'm thinking there's a lot of people who go through a lot of what I went through, and that was over 30 years ago. So can you imagine the generation now? I have 2 kids in college right now. They're both liberals. They didn't start out that way. But the thing of the matter is they are. And I just see that the indoctrination started when they were in school, in elementary school, K through 12, and they finished it off in college. And in fact, some of the kids I've talked to said that in the first week of college that several kids have told me that the professor will say, just so you know, there is no God.
Yeah.
And start the class that way. So basically everything the parents tell them or taught them, they're going to fight against it throughout their lives in the administration of the school. And I have friends who have also been the administration in school, principals and things like that. And the older ones, my best friend, she chose the curriculum for her school system. And she said there was just not much to choose from. They're all liberal. All the curriculums that they could find were liberal. Now, when you go to a Catholic school, my daughter started in a Catholic school. And in the Catholic school, by the end of kindergarten, 100% of all of the children are reading. We moved further away, so they didn't have it in a nearby Catholic school. I thought, oh, this is like a nice school. I'll put her in there. Then I found out that in public school in California, you're not expected to be at reading level until the end of 2nd grade. The standards are that different. The end of 2nd grade. That's what I'm talking about. And then I see the standards are just lower. And not only that, now they don't even have all the fancy things at the Catholic school. They don't have the extra computers and all the things that the public school has. It's very small, very simple, but the teachers make more money and they have higher standards, and the kids rise to those standards, all of them. So to me, the whole thing, every time, if you want a quick applause, if you go to any other program, all you have to do is say, pay teachers more money and the kids will be better students. No, not if they're going to still teach the same way, using the same curriculum. Paying them more money is not going to change a thing. We have to have options. We have to have educational options, not just a one size fits all. Oh, did we freeze again? Oh, there we are.
Sorry.
So we need educational options. I believe that fervently, especially now what we're seeing with the teachers unions keeping the schools closed all over the country while they go on vacation and what. I not all over the country, but I mean here in Texas, my granddaughter's in full time 5 days a week, and they're doing fine. So, but I think the curriculums have to have a complete overhaul over curriculums in the school, and I do think we should either have vouchers or just more charter schools, more school options, and give parents choices.
The best option, I think, for education to keep it safe is to take education back to the churches. One of the as As one of the things I actually did want to maybe point out as well, which you should keep an eye out on, is the minimum wage debate. And
Oh,
I think this is one of the things. It's one of those doozies that Black people are not too sure actually hurts them more than it helps them.
mm,
There's a lot of evidence, even in my country, in any country, that minimum wages tend to cause Black unemployment spikes. They actually do this a lot. And the reason is because Black entrepreneurs are usually very small businesses who
mhm,
can't afford to pay hiked minimum wages and usually are left in a situation. And it's usually planned in such a way. And you have to be very careful with the Black minimum wage. Like I said, or the minimum wage, it tends to hit hard. One of your senators, I think, had a better suggestion where he said, look, put a minimum wage for billion-dollar companies.
mhm,
Let the billion-dollar companies pay the minimum wage and then leave a blank minimum wage. Even Walter Williams said, put a zero minimum wage for small businesses and then put it for big companies. And
mhm,
then let's see how this works out. And let's see if the big companies are going to be in support of it. Because right now, you'll notice that big companies aren't complaining that much about the minimum wage. They're even raising their minimum wage as virtue signaling with it. What
yes.
you're not noticing is that that minimum wage is meant to drive down small businesses, and eventually it will allow those big businesses a lot more negotiating power. Because what small businesses do is they take away a lot of the excess labor. Everyone goes to a big business first when they're looking for a job, and then the small businesses mop up the excess labor, leaving the labor market starved of people. So there are not that many people to look for. And
Mhm,
that's why you were seeing all these help wanted signs for so many years in America, because of so many small businesses that were thriving and hiring so many people. And you had a wait and you had a gap of people
mhm,
they couldn't fill positions. But your big businesses don't like that, because the problem with the big businesses, now they can't just fire someone randomly or threaten not to raise their wages, because you know what? They can't replace those people. The power comes with the person who can replace. So if there's a lot of business options, then laborers have power. But if
mhm,
there's very few businesses to work in, then it's the employer who has the power. So what the big employers want is to wash it out. Now, how does this affect Black people a lot? Go back to a study Walter Williams did, and it was a
mhm,
shocking number he put in America. He said that in America, 13%, the unemployment rate among 16-year-old boys in 1950 was 13%. Okay, it was only 13%, 1-3, were unemployed. 87% of the young Black men were employed. So guess what was very difficult to start back in the 1950s? Drugs. It was very difficult to start a drug trade with Black boys who had jobs when they went out, when they left school. So
mhm,
it was highly unlikely. What did they start doing? They started moving the minimum wage up. And with every movement of the minimum wage up, the unemployed population of young Black boys between the age of 16 and 17 grew until the 1980s, when it got to 80%. Sorry, 50%.
mhm,
50% of young Black boys were unemployed because small Black-owned businesses couldn't hire them,
mm,
and they couldn't give them as much work as they could.
mhm.
And what that ended up doing to the young Black population was, now you have,
Uh,
yeah, so
it's a good thing I record because I can edit out most of the freezing.
yeah, so the point I was trying to drive at here is,
Mhm,
as the unemployment rate for young Black boys went up,
mhm,
drug dealing went up. Because who are the employees of drug dealers? Young Black men who were unemployed.
mhm,
And the same thing that also happened was, young Black men back in the 50s were the ones who when they were working, when they were young,
mhm,
when they got older, they understood the value of taking care of a home, and they were easier to settle in and say, you know what, if I get a girl pregnant or anything, I have to be responsible, and I'm also able to get a job.
mhm,
I've proven to myself. But now when they're unemployed, they don't know if they can have jobs. So they're actually, they tend to run away from their pregnancies now. So
mhm,
when you had them employed, there was lower drug trade and there was more marrying people when you
mhm,
actually were in a relationship. When now you had the young Black boys unemployed, there was less marrying people and there was more drug trade. And who do you think organized those minimum wage hikes? The exact same political party they're voting for right now.
mhm,
They've been pushing the minimum wage higher and higher because they know that Black businesses cannot afford those minimum wage. Small Black businesses, the inner city, the guy who's a laundromat, who's the sole laundromat in the Black community, he can't afford that. They can't afford. These small Black businesses were struggling. So you have to understand that there's a lot of, it's something I call slow poison. They feed slow poison into Black communities and they destroy them slowly. Simple things like community banks. How many Black community banks are you seeing vanishing? The Black community bank in America is disappearing. Why? Because when the interest rates are low, bank profits are actually very low. And when you've got low bank profits, the small bank goes out of business. And most of the Black community banks are small banks. So all the Black community banks were getting wiped out. Black people were not able to get as many loans as possible because banks usually lend in their proximity. They lend to the communities they serve. So that's also what was harming a lot of Black people from actually pulling themselves out of poverty, being able to bank together, and who again pushed the interest rates down very low. Once again, you've got Democrats, but in line, even with some of the Republicans who did that, like George Bush, and pushed the interest rates really low. But that started under the Clinton era. So there are a lot of these are the things I like to call slow poison. So I think that I hope you got that part where I was trying to say that a lot of the policies are harmful to Black people, but I think they don't understand how. And it's because they don't understand how. And the unfortunate thing that has also happened is the Democrats have bought off Black leaders. They've done that systematically, and they use the Black leaders to keep the Black people in the corrals. It's something that's been used for a long time. Even in African countries, Black leaders are easily bought off by foreign powers, and therefore our people just cling to them. So you kind of have to prove to the Black community that, look, your Black leaders are not doing the best for you. Two, you shouldn't be afraid to call the Democrats racist. I think the problem is that most of the conservatives don't want to get in their skin in the game and say, hold on, these are racists. They don't think we can have IDs. They rummage our places with drugs. They basically unemployed most of our youth. They've arrested them because the very same people who the Clinton crime bill ended up arresting were the very same people put out by the unemployment rate. Yeah, no, I know it's our line as well. That's the key. But yeah, especially when it comes to matters of trying to educate how to deal with economics. And I think maybe just if hopefully the network is friendly, the parting word I would say is that most of the conservatives should not be afraid to address things like income inequality. Income inequality comes from things like regulation, excessive regulation. It's not the system is rigged. It's actually that the regulations are so hard that Black people can't start businesses. And when they want to start businesses, it's difficult. And that's why I said, watch Walter Williams' documentary, Good Intentions. He actually outlines how how the efforts that they're doing in the education system, regulation, and various things like that have actually been harmful to the Black community economically. And he did that in 1984. And you'll actually be able to say, if you can turn around and say, we're not the racists because these guys have been doing this to you. And now how do you fix income inequality? Donald Trump was doing it by trying to push entrepreneurship, Black entrepreneurship, economic zones, economic opportunity zones. Those things were actually targeting things that were working. This is why even Van Jones came out and said, hold on, this guy's actually hitting a button here. Even Charlemagne the God said, I actually understand why young Black men are drawn to Donald Trump, because the messaging he was pushing was hitting at them very hardly. And even the school choice one polled a lot of Black mothers who said, hold on, we want school choice. Black mothers, 72% of them want school choice. Who fight school choice? The Democrats and the teachers' unions. So at the end of the day, it's about packaging the conservative message to meet the Black problems, which is poverty. Trying to meet the Black problems, which is poverty. Trying to meet the Black problems, which is inequality. If you have a lot more entrepreneurs, you have a lot less inequality between Black and white. And you know who proved that? The Asian Americans. The Asian Americans were the #1 proof of how entrepreneurship can clear that out.
Well, they have I don't know about right now, but back in the 80s, I worked for a news station in Houston, and I did a report on Asian American family, and how they pooled their resources together to buy a store. And they literally took the jobs of picking up trash on the sides of the freeway and pooled their money together to get their first store. Now, I don't know many Black families who would share a bank account. And I think that is something that's different about entrepreneurial immigration, legal immigration. That's something we should learn from. That's been my experience. And the program that I produced, it was a lot of interviewing, and I learned so much from this family. And I think the mother, the oldest person in the family, she was in charge of the bank account. Everybody would pool their income together, and she would make sure the whole family had food and clothing, and they had a savings system, and they saved their money, and they bought their first store. Everybody worked there. Some still worked in menial labor, but then they would go and pool their money and get the second store, and so on and so on. And I think having family breakdown is really what's contributed to Black poverty.
Okay, so yeah, I think it's now at that point where it's literally on and off now.
I know, but how about next Wednesday? We could start earlier if you'd like.
Yeah, I'd have no problem with that.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. I sure appreciate you coming today. I'm going to see if I can piece together enough for a show. I think I had got enough, and I just pieced it together, and I have some other things I have to add, like about Joe Biden and stuff like that. Oh my gosh, there's so much going on, and I'm doing this research on the trafficking thing, which is really depressing. It's depressing. But what I'm learning is I had no idea people thought like that. I had no idea. And a friend of mine told me a little bit about it, and I'm like, oh, well, I didn't know either was that evil.
It is. It can have an ugly face to it, trust me.
Yeah, but it needs to be talked about, because it's swept under the rug. It's one of the main things being swept under the rug about the illegal immigration surge that we're having right now, and slavery in this country. That is an issue. So for all the talk of reparations for some slavery from 200 years ago, they better start saving up for some reparations for all these babies coming here and getting hurt. Some of them get killed. They have ways of changing their identities even. They change their identities so that when they kill them, there will be nobody to look for them.
And it's really unfortunate. And we even had the problem where we saw a live slave auction in Libya, I think a few years ago, recently. So these things are real, they're alive, and the current ones are being overlooked because people are trying to have grievance about past ones.
Well, we need to worry about today. I think there's nothing we can do to change the past, but we can surely change today and tomorrow.
That we can.
Well, God bless you. I appreciate you being on the show. I'll send you a link for next Wednesday. Let's see, today, I'm going to try for earlier. Maybe it won't be as congested, and we can have a good show. How about that?
Yeah.
I'd love it.
Yeah.
It'll
be perfect for me. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I learned so much. I was thinking, do I need to go back to college? I go, no, I'll just hang out with him.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I'll be more than glad to come back.
Okay, we'll talk to you next week. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Okay.
Have a good evening.
God bless you too. Bye-bye.
Listening to kathysright.com. Make sure that you subscribe and hit that notification bell. It really helps out. God bless you. God bless America. Bye.